right, while we're waiting for a few more to jump on, let me go ahead and welcome everyone so far. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first of 4 webinars with Carey Wallace, who's the founder and consultant of AgencyFocus. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can drop them into the chat feature, and I'll share those with Carey as we go or at the appropriate times. The webinar today is approved for 1 hour of CE. At the end of the presentation, a QR code will appear. Y'all know the drill. Scan it, fill out your information, and we'll go ahead and get that filed for you so that you can get credit for that hour. And we'll get your certificates posted to your Community Hub account within 2 weeks of the webinar. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Carey Wallace. She really needs no introduction. She's a powerhouse woman in this industry, and we're so excited to have her here today. What I will tell you is she is passionate about helping independent agents understand their value and make informed decisions for their agency, and that's exactly what she's going to help you do today. Today, she is going to show you how a fair market valuation can offer agency owners a comprehensive health checkup, providing insights into financial performance, growth potential, and operational efficiency to help guide decisions on growth, acquisitions, and perpetuation strategies. So without further ado, Carey, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Many of you may think that getting a fair market valuation of your agency is only something you do if you're thinking of buying or selling or transitioning ownership. And actually, nothing can be further from the truth. It's actually a great idea to have a health checkup of your agency far before you ever want to transition ownership or want to acquire another agency or sell your own agency. And the reason for that is the report actually gives you insights on what you can do to improve the value of your agency, maybe allocate your resources differently or think about your business differently that will open up more opportunities for you if you've got the gift of time to put some of those things in place before you need to make a decision like buying another agency or selling your own agency or transitioning ownership to a successor. So that's what this webinar is about today, is about how you can use this report and the insights that are included in there as a business planning tool, not something you do just before you're going to make a decision. So a fair market value is actually a potential price that an asset would sell on the open market. The reason it's a potential price is it's not the actual price of your agency. The actual price is determined between a buyer and a seller and the synergies that are created or exist between those two organizations that have their own makeup, their own unique complexion. So this is what is a reasonable expectation of what your business would be worth with no synergies contemplated, because we don't know who a potential buyer is. And therefore, a fair market value typically depicts what closer to an internal price, not an external price. So just think about that. If you ever get a fair market value of your agency done, it is not the price. That is not what you would take to a potential buyer and say, this is what I want for my agency. It is the floor or the baseline that you could expect based on reasonable expectations of what an agency your size, under your complexion, and based on your performance could command in the current marketplace in our industry. So there are 4 ways you can actually maximize your value utilizing a fair market value. Number 1, it allows you to take a look at your business and know which numbers to pay attention to, how your numbers compare to other agencies of your size or agencies of the next larger size. It helps you understand what those numbers mean and what you could do in order to change the value of your agency. The second is it helps you understand what risks exist inside your business and how you might be able to mitigate some of those risks. Every business has risks. It's impossible to think that you're going to eliminate all of them, but once you know what the risks are, you can take actions to mitigate those. Again, that gift of time is something that is incredibly important. It also helps you know how to build a plan. The single biggest risk factor inside any business, especially an independent insurance agency, is a single owner past the age of retirement without a perpetuation plan. And the reason for that is if you're a single owner and you are unable to come to work, that is the fastest way that uncertainty will hit both your staff, possibly your carriers, and your customers. And if any of those three uh, groups decide to get uncomfortable and start to leave your agency, the value of your agency will go down immediately. So, again, having a fair market value will give you the baseline to create that plan. And it'll also help you think about how to operate your business like you're selling it tomorrow. It'll make you think about how could I allocate my resources differently? What business decisions should I make? And rather than work in your business, how do you actually work on your business? Because this health checkup, honestly, the least important thing is the number in the report. The most valuable thing are the insights that are influencing that number that you could then put to work inside your agency. So what's the starting point? Well, my background's finance, so it's going to be your numbers. We will take a look at your agency financials there in order to do a fair market value. We map your financials to the agency or to the industry benchmarks to show you how you're running your business compared to other agencies of your size, and look for trends. Is your agency growing? Are you allocating the same resources year over year in marketing and technology? Well, how much do you place in each of those categories, like employees? We'll look for peaks and one-time expenditures to eliminate anything that will not recur. We look to identify what the discretionary expenses are inside your agency in order to get to what is a reasonable expectation of the ongoing operating profit of your agency. This will do a lot of different things. It helps you see as a percentage of revenue what percent you're putting in each of the categories, how it compares, and what those decisions do to your ongoing profitability. So for instance, if you're an agency that spends 70% of your revenue on your people, you only have 30% of your revenue left to pay for your agency location, your technology, your marketing. The average agency or a well-performing agency actually commands about a 30% profitability. So if you're putting that much towards your people, you're nowhere near the performance of the top agencies that have a 30% profitability. So by comparing yourself to the benchmarks, you can see, where am I over? Where am I under? And how does that compare to other agencies? And am I making reasonable choices, or do I need to rethink those? So this is what it looks like when you look at a financial statement, and it's organized in the categories. And the only way to use the benchmarks is to categorize your expenses the same way the benchmarks are. So as part of that process, we map your financial statement to the benchmarks and give you that guide so you can go back and change how you're running your financials so you can see what that looks like. In each of these main categories, we divide where the gray is by the total revenue in order to get those percentages. Common areas of adjustments in a financial statement are compensation. Sometimes, agency owners compensate themselves many different ways, some through 100% through W-2, some 100% through distributions, and everywhere in between. So we will advise you on what is a reasonable amount that you would compensate yourself as an agency owner through W-2. What is a reasonable amount that you would take as a distribution so you can show a reasonable profitability and also meet with IRS guidelines. The structure of your agency will also influence that decision as well, but compensation is often an adjustment that is made in this process in order to get to what is reasonable. It also is one of the biggest insights. If your comp structure is so far outside what the industry benchmarks and industry norms are, it could preclude you from some potential buyers being attracted to your agency. And what I mean is, if your compensation structure is so rich, you're paying 70 new and 30 renewal to your producers, a potential buyer would not be able to maintain that and the profitability in order to buy your agency at the going rate in the industry. They would have to change that compensation structure. And by doing that, they might lose one of your key employees. If you lose a key employee, you might lose accounts. And if you lose accounts, the value of your agency goes down. So making sure you know how your comp structure compares to the industry norms can really help you prepare in the future for when you might want to sell your agency. Rent and occupancy is another area that typically gets adjusted only because many agency owners own their business, and it's another way to compensate themselves. So we make sure that that rent and occupancy number reflects a reasonable amount towards rent for your location and your size of your agency. In addition, travel and entertainment sometimes contains some discretionary expenses. So we right size that, make sure that it really only reflects the expenses that are necessary for selling insurance. Insurance, again, is an area. If you own the building, you might be running the insurance expense through the agency. You might have other insurance like cars that maybe are not related to selling insurance. So that's an area of adjustment. Marketing also. So again, we're going to look through the P&L. We're going to look for peaks and valleys for one-time expenses. You might rebrand the agency one year, and therefore there's a high number in marketing that's never going to recur again. We're going to remove those. We're going to use the benchmarks in order to help you know, are you above or below? And then we're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions to make sure that we get down to what is the reasonable expectation of the profitability of the agency, so you can now make some decisions about the agency. I do want to note, every agency has discretionary expenses. And by discretionary, I could mean, that could mean a lot of things, but knowing what that dollar amount of discretionary expenses are allows you to make a decision as a business owner and look at the total to say, I've been wanting to hire a producer, but I don't think I have enough money in order to do that. Well, when we group all that discretionary expenses together, you might very well have the ability to hire a producer or to make an investment in a piece of technology that you've been contemplating. So part of it is just being able to look at the business a little bit differently and maybe reallocate your resources. So that is one of the first things we do, because we want to get to what is the operating profit of the agency. The acronym for operating profit is EBITDA, which stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And if you ever follow me on social, I have a hat that says that. Just because I think it's the number one thing as a business owner that you should know about your agency. It is the number that gets multiplied by the multiples that everybody talks about. And it actually is the number in that equation that you can influence the most. So knowing this number allows, and what it should be, allows you to be in the driver's seat about how to influence the value of your agency. So if you can operate your agency at a high profitability, you're doing everything to maximize the value of your agency. If you want to acquire an agency, you want to maximize the value of your own agency, because then you will have more lending ability than another agency that's not operating profitably. So there's multiple reasons why knowing this number gives you a lot of power. Again, you're going to look at the cash earnings of the agency, eliminate the interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, eliminate all non-recurring items, include your owner's compensation at a reasonable amount, not the distributions, in order to get to EBITDA. This is a little spreadsheet. You're going to get these slides or the recording of this. This is just put here in case you wanted to see it in a spreadsheet form, how to get to that EBITDA number. So not only are we going to look at your financials, figure out what the ongoing profitability is, we're also going to look at your revenue numbers and the trend. So in a growth number, I'm looking for the organic growth rate of the agency, meaning not by acquisition, but what is the green new growth rate of the agency? And you get that by looking at this period's revenue minus less any this period subtracted and divided by the previous period. So this period less the previous period divided by the previous period gives you the growth rate. You want to make sure that you remove any one-time revenue from both equations, if from both numbers, if that revenue will not renew. Perfect example is bonds. They do not renew. If you have a large book of 1 year, 2 year bonds, they should not be calculated in your growth rate or your retention rate. So make sure any one-time revenue is not included. Your contingencies should not be included in this growth rate. It's just total commission and fee revenue, because contingencies fluctuate as the agency's performance, loss ratios, hard market, lots of things, and it can skew. So you're not looking for total revenue, you're looking for the recurring revenue of commission and fee, and compare it to the recurring revenue of the previous period in order to get that growth rate. Okay, so now that you have your financials, now you need to look at what are the opportunities, what can I do with that? Well, if you know what your EBITDA is and you know what the total of your discretionary expenses are, you might be able to deploy those resources differently. Now that you know what an average agency your size is doing, you might say, I'm going to double down because I'm growing faster than the average agency and what I'm doing is working. But the whole idea is now you know your performance compared to other agencies, you know your profitability compared to other agencies, and you can make an informed decision to say, am I putting too much towards my people? Should I really rethink my comp structure? Do I have the right team in place? Do I need to add another person in order to continue to grow? Should I invest in marketing differently? Should I be thinking about outsourced services differently? What are the things that I should be doing in order to drive growth and profitability? Growth and profitability are the two biggest factors in the risk factors of a agency's value. So if you are growing and you're able to grow profitably, you will be more valuable than an agency that has flat growth or is declining, or an agency that's growing but not doing it profitably. So having both of those factors in your agency makes you more valuable than another agency. So it might lead you to, should I hire? In order to make that decision, you have to look at what is my revenue per producer? What is my revenue per employee? What is my revenue per CSR? How does it compare to the benchmarks? Should I be expecting my team to be more efficient than the benchmark? Are they less efficient than the benchmark? Or are they generating more revenue than the average producer is? And I should add more resources in that category. There's a caveat here because many agencies are now utilizing virtual assistants, which are changing the revenue per CSR and potentially the revenue per producer, as you're taking some of the administrative load off of your licensed staff in order to increase their capacity and give them the ability to be more productive. So use that number with an asterisk and think about, what does my agency's makeup look like? Do I have VAs in place? Do I have technology creating efficiencies? But use it as a guide to say, the average agency operates this way. How am I operating, and what expectation should I have? Great way to figure out if your efficiency is in line with what another agency is, and give you some things to at least explore and dig into. For your new business, if you're growing Fantastic. The next question I would ask is, where's the new business coming from, and how likely is it to continue if you have a change inside your agency? So if you are growing and it's all generated by a producer that also happens to be the owner who is nearing or past the age of retirement, the likelihood of your agency continuing to operate that way after a transition will be less than an agency that has new business that's being generated by 6 producers, all represent 20% or less than 20% of the growth rate. And so any one change is not going to have a huge impact on the future performance of the agency. So knowing where something's concentrated and what the risk is related to that can help you either expand your team, expand the knowledge of the people that are inside the agency, increase relationships with referral partners so they're not isolated to just one person. Lots of ways to make sure that the ongoing performance will not be impeded by a very small number of things. So you want to de-risk your agency as much as you possibly can. And one of those ways is what the sources of new business are, and do those relationships transfer to other people. One of the other ways is to think about your retention strategy. So one of the metrics that is a great indicator of your retention and your book's retention over time is your number of policies per customer. You should know how much, what your policies per customer is in your personal lines book, in your commercial lines book, in any niche, and try to maximize it as much as possible. This is where having clean data inside your agency is incredibly important, because numbers can be misleading, especially if you have a package policy or you have customers that are related to each other but listed individually in your AMS system. You want to know what the policies per total customer is, not necessarily just the way you have it listed. For instance, if I own 3 companies, I would want to take a look at the whole picture of what I would influence inside your agency if I left your agency. So make sure you have the ability to have that line of sight inside your agency, because it can highlight risk. It can also highlight strengths. You want to know what your clear retention rate is and calculate it appropriately. This is the metric that most agencies struggle with, because our AMS systems are not set up to calculate retention. Retention is calculated by the business in this period less the new business divided by the business in the previous period. That is all business that will renew. So it's all recurring business. If you download and you do not correct your downloads to say, a download it typically comes through and says that business is new to the carrier. If you download that and put it in your AMS system and do not correct that to say it is a rewrite because it's not new to the agency, it was just rewritten from one carrier to the other. If you use your new business report in your retention calculation and you've not made that correction, your calculation will be off. And that is very, very common. You should look at retention in 3 ways: by policy, by revenue, and by premium. Because especially in this hard market, your revenue retention could be over 100%, but your policy retention could be dipping under 90%. Therefore, a buyer would want to know both numbers, because when the market softens and rate increases stop, your book will actually look flat or declining when that correction occurs. So knowing all 3 numbers is incredibly important. The last I would tell you is always audit your book for the number of monolines. They are the most transient. They are also the most biggest opportunity for cross-sell. So if you're looking to grow, it's easier to sell to a current customer than it is to obtain a new customer. Great opportunity, but knowing what those are and putting some incentive around that is incredibly powerful inside an agency. This is just, again, the 3 ways to know what retention is. It is a challenge. I wish that it was easier. Many people use actually their CRM in order to do their retention calculation, not their AMS system. But having the right policies in place is really the key here, and making sure that you're auditing that your new business is truly new to the agency, not just new to the carrier. So we've talked about some financials and some metrics that you should know inside your agency. Now I'm going to shift to some risk. We talked a little bit about risk in the producer risk, but there are several areas of risk that are assessed in a fair market valuation, and they're broken into 3 categories. You've got performance risk, which we talked about, which was growth, profitability, retention rate, your loss ratio, those kinds of performance-based numbers. Then you've got concentration risk, which is concentration by ownership, by producer, by carrier, by account, by line of business, or by niche. And then you have culture. How does your agency operate, and how has it protected itself, and how is new business coming? How are you attracting new clients? How are you keeping new clients? This is really about how you run your business. And all of them are thinking about what is the transferability and the predictability of your agency. So could your business operate if you lost your largest carrier? Would it have a huge impact on your agency? If your largest carrier reduced their commission rate by 2%, what kind of impact would that have inside your agency? Or if you lost one of your account managers and they have all the knowledge to support your largest niche, like what would happen inside the agency? So that transferability and predictability tells you the degree of risk and how it might change the value of your agency. So owner concentration is the first. I've already said that the single owner past the age of retirement with no plan is the biggest risk. The weighted average shareholder age across all agencies in the US is 56 years old. 17% of owners are actually over 65. Having multiple owners inside the agency mitigates the risk as long as these owners have duplication of responsibility. So typically an owner would be the person who may reconcile commissions and pay your people. If that person is the only person that can do that, that is a linchpin and could cause a problem inside the agency for the agency to continue to operate. At an agency that was owned by 3 agency owners, they talked about getting a valuation for years. In fact, they would joke with me every time they saw me. They kept saying, yeah, we need to do that. Yeah, we need to do that, because they had no perpetuation plan. They had a way of understanding their ownership between the 3 of them based on the size of their books. That's how they did it. But they had never had a real conversation about how they would buy each other out and how they would all 3 eventually exit. They were all around the same age, but actually one was about 5 years younger than the other 2. And I was, going into a store on a Saturday morning, my phone rang, and it was one of those 3 owners. And I jokingly said, hey, are you finally ready to have a valuation done? And his voice cracked. And his answer was no. The youngest of the 3 owners had had a massive heart attack on Friday night, and they were terrified because they had to buy his widow out, and they had never had a conversation about it. They had never had a valuation done of the agency. But what was worse was that owner did their financials, did all their operations, did all their commission reconciliations, and the other 2 didn't even have logins to that part of their system, had no idea how to do it, and we had to immediately get them up to speed. It's super sad that I was their call on a Saturday when they lost their best friend, but that's what I mean. It can create an incredible amount of stress at the worst time of your life if you do not have a plan in place. Even in this agency with 3 owners, it created a lot of stress because his knowledge was so specific and the other 2 didn't worry about it, didn't even really think about it. They were sales. Like one was the commercial sales guy, the other actually focused in life and personal, and they didn't want anything to do with what the other owner did. But unfortunately, when he was gone, they had to step in and do that. So documenting and cross-training in key roles is incredibly important. Even if you have multiple owners, if you've got silos, it creates risk. And it's not just owners. If you have silos in any role, documenting it and cross-training is incredibly important. Your carrier concentration is another area that you should think about. 2.5 years ago, I would do evaluation and I would tell people that you should not have more than 25% with any one carrier. And I would oftentimes get pretty irritated people with me saying, that's ridiculous. We do that so we can maximize contingencies. Don't you know how this works? And I do know how it works. I absolutely do. And when the hard market hit and somebody has 80% with one carrier because they are easy to deal with, their contingencies are amazing, and that carrier changed their commission structure, it impacted 80% of that agency's business. So I'm talking purely from a risk standpoint, no more than 25% with one carrier. Typically, you create 3 or 4 lead carriers so you can get in contingency range if you're in an area that you can. That's very difficult in your area. I know that because you all have a ton of E&S business. But if you think about it, if you have standard carriers that you can maximize, you want to make sure that you create those leads so you can be in contingency range with multiple options. So one risk does not completely take that out of the mix for you. Getting depth with your carriers is even more important when you've got niches. The overall rating of the carriers that you do business with matters, and the likelihood that that carrier will change their appetite, their commission structures, or contingency. That is an absolute wild card, but there are some carriers that are far more tried and true than others. Many agencies that were not already part of a network, cluster, or alliance are now contemplating that simply to help mitigate some of this risk and also be able to give themselves the depth without the pressure of having to place the amount of business in order to obtain those direct appointments. Direct appointments are incredibly difficult to come by right now if you don't already have them for many agencies. So again, there's a lot of different strategies. You got to look at your own book and decide, what is my risk? Do I have depth? Is there something that I should put in place? Is there something that I should think about differently? I will also say, oftentimes we get a book of business report in order to assess this risk. And through the process, the agency owner had never actually looked at it that way. And they didn't realize that, this carrier was bought by this carrier, but they're in the system differently. And when you add it all up, they had no idea that they had over 50% with one carrier, or honestly, in their minds, they were thinking, yeah, it makes up 30% of my book, but they never look to see what it really is. Same thing with their split between personal lines and commercial lines. Oftentimes, when I'm talking to an agency owner, they'll say my split is 60-40. And when we actually get their book of business, it's more like flipped the other way. And they didn't realize over time and growth, it is actually shifted. So making sure you're looking at these things and paying attention so you know where you are helps you make some strategic decisions about what you want to do. One of the ways to change your carrier concentration, which is not overnight, is to potentially market something that is an appetite for one of your carriers that could be your number 2, number 3, number 4 for your growth strategy. Not stop placing with your lead carrier, but expand what you're trying to attract to the agency in order to round that out. Lots of different ways to think about this, but knowing what it is and being able to manage it over time allows you to soften the risk, not completely eliminate it, but at least soften that risk and potentially identify, what your potential acquisition targets would look like, which will also change your concentration in your carriers as well. Your customer concentration is an area that is of risk as well. We look at the top 10 accounts. Typically, I like to get the entire book of business because then I can see what that risk looks like way beyond just the top. But at a minimum, we look at your top 10 accounts, the percentage of revenue and premium in any one customer. What's the overall percentage in the top 10? What is the number of your customers, the average size of your customers, and again, that policies per customer. The absolute most concentrated I've ever seen was 45% in one customer. Imagine if you look at if you lost that one customer, or you bought an agency that has one account that makes up 45% of their revenue, it is not the same risk. So when people are talking about the rule of thumb, what the value of an agency is, these are the things that change the value of an agency significantly, or they change the manner in which you buy an agency in order to ensure that you can continue to pay the debt on the loan for that agency. If you buy an agency that has 45% of their revenue in one account and you lose the account, you will be paying on something that you do not no longer have, and it'll change how you can satisfy that debt pretty significantly. Therefore, it'll change the value of the agency if you get it valued or if a bank looks at it. If you do an owner finance note and you use 2.5 times as your guide, you could really be overpaying for a book of business and find yourself in a bad situation, which is why many owner-held inside deals that do not have advice sell at an unreasonable price that cannot be managed, and sometimes they have to be renegotiated. This is one of those risk factors that people overlook because they're only looking at top line revenue. Okay, producer concentration is the same kind of risk. Obviously, we want to know where is the new business coming from, what percentage of the agency's overall written premium and revenue is coming from each producer. Does the producer have specialized expertise that nobody else in the agency has? That creates a risk. That means your customers might get very uncomfortable if that person's not there in order to support them. That would be a great opportunity to start cross-selling, bringing other people in, mentoring them, having an account manager that the customer knows really, really well. What is the average age of your producers? Are they all going to retire at the same time? If you wanted to sell your agency, one of the best things you could do is make sure that your staff stays with you through that transition, because they provide continuity and predictability in the future performance of your agency. If you wait to sell and everybody's going to retire at the same time, the value of your agency is less than someone who has longevity and has a healthy diversification of the staff. So make sure you know what that is. And if you have everybody that's at retirement age and you hire a 20-year-old, really, really difficult for a 60-year-old to teach a 20-year-old. You should try, which is incredibly difficult, I understand, but you should try to have a staff where the communication gap is not more than 1 decade. What is the overall exposure of the account inside the agency? If a producer is specialized, but they have a team of account managers working on it, less risky than if a producer was the only person that can talk to that client. It's actually one of the worst things you can do, and actually creates risk inside an agency, even as an owner. It's very, very common for an owner to be like, nope, this is my account, nobody else is allowed in it. That's probably one of the worst things you can do, especially if it's a key account. Having contracts in place and awareness of what the repercussions are if there's a non-solicit and a non-piracy clause in place. We all know that non-competes are not what protects an agency. What protects them is the non-piracy and non-solicit. Providing a pathway to ownership is one of the best ways to provide continuity and longevity in your staff. It also is a huge need inside our industry as so many people are nearing retirement age. So that is one of the tools that I think is most underutilized. And potentially by going through this process, you could see your risk and say, listen, it would make a lot of sense for me to take my key people, give them a pathway to ownership or a deferred revenue. What are non-piracy policies? Is a question that was asked. Non-piracy means you are not allowed to take any staff with you. So non-solicit means you cannot solicit any of the customers. Non-piracy means you can't solicit and take any of the staff if you exit for whatever period of time. Great question. So again, having that pathway to ownership or a deferred comp, something that keeps your staff with you and incentivized to stay with you, and also incentivized for the agency to grow and grow profitably, strengthens the agency significantly. If you're able to do that or able to consider it, it's one of the best things you can do. Concentration by niche is, again, another area. You need to know how much that niche makes up of your overall book. The nature of the niche is important because if it's incredibly volatile, your agency will also be incredibly volatile. Is it based on environmental factors? Does it run hot? Is it a niche that will cause your loss ratios to be incredibly high, which means it impacts the whole agency? Do you need a specialized level of expertise in order to do it? Is it actually a niche where you have exclusivity that can create great value, but it also might limit the number of people that you could transition because the level of expertise and the level of knowledge and the approval process with that exclusivity could limit the number of buyers that you would have potentially for your agency. It's just something to consider. And that's not true for all exclusive programs, but it is something to think about. A niche allows you to grow and be very efficient and typically very profitable because you're doing something over and over and over with the same carriers or same multiple carriers. But if you lose that market or you lose that carrier, it can also conversely be a risk. So you got to weigh what the specific situation looks like for your niche. The most common, when I ask someone if they have a niche, a lot of people will say, yes, we write a lot of contractors. A lot of people write a lot of contractors. I'm talking about a niche that's very specific and has some, may or may not be as transferable. So we got to dig in and understand exactly what that niche is inside an agency in order to place the risk with it, and also figure out, is there something that needs to be mitigated there? We already talked about some of those performance metrics. Capacity and efficiency, those are the revenue per employee, revenue per producer, revenue per CSR, creating what that looks like. Your loss ratio, it absolutely will impact the value of an agency, especially what your trend is over time. And again, some of these risk factors compound with each other. So if you've got a huge trucking book or habitational that runs hot and you have a high loss ratio, those in multiple carriers, your agency's value is going to be different than someone who doesn't have those kinds of experiences that can be predictable to continue into the future just by the nature of the business that you have there. So what's driving the loss matters, not just that you had a loss, and what that likelihood is that they will improve over time. If you've got a niche that runs hot, it's very unlikely that it will improve, so it will impact you. So how's the culture is the hardest thing to quantify. Everything so far have been numbers and very easy for me to see in percentages. For a math person like me, that's comfortable. Here's the stuff that becomes less measurable, but pretty impactful. And for agencies that are innovating and creating an infrastructure, focusing on scale, thinking about it, those agencies typically are operating in a way where they have high profitability, high growth, versus other agencies that maybe aren't innovating and still have a great performance, great lifestyle, but their performance numbers will be different. And that divide has gotten larger and larger over the past 5 years with the Great Resignation, with COVID, with remote working. That's created what I describe as the agencies that will be acquired and the agencies that are poised to be the acquirer. I'm not saying that no highly performing agencies will be acquired. They certainly will. The multiples in our industry are crazy, but there is this divide with those that are leveraging technology and thinking about how it can optimize the agency rather than resisting utilizing technology. That's one example. Less than 13% of independent insurance agencies use a sales tool like a CRM, like Agency Zoom. Less than 13%. And that's based on a survey that was done by Catalyst, which, if you don't know what that is, I know Louisiana is a huge supporter in Catalyst. You should look at that, take the tech assessment, figure out where you are. But you are a sales organization. You should have a sales tool that helps you manage this information and know what you're doing. And if you don't, that is one of the things that you could see a huge impact in your agency by giving yourself the tools in order to manage your sales process, hire producers, predict their success rate. All of that comes from having a CRM that allows you to manage that process and see that flow. Many agencies do not have a way of measuring their customer sentiment or their customers' likelihood of staying with the agency. This is an example of an agency that's using a very easy survey called, I can't remember the tool they're using, but it creates an NPS score. And there's several tools out there that can give you your NPS score. And it's a simple survey that says, would you recommend this agency to someone else? Yes or no? And you get classified from anywhere from 1 to 10. 9 and 10s are raving fans or promoters. And they are, you should go take all those promoters and ask them for a Google review. 100%. They love you. If you are 8 to 7, I think you are passive. You aren't a raving fan, but you're not saying negative things about the agency. 7 and below, they're at risk of leaving your agency. So you should be able to have a tool that allows you to classify your customers into these categories so your CSRs know where to start rather than starting just at the top of the alphabet and working down. If you can use a tool like this, your retention rate will typically be higher than an agency that does not. And especially in this market where there's not enough time to get to everybody and do all the things, this is an example of using a very easy tool to be able to see what is the likelihood that my in this agency, they sent out 3,000 surveys. 996 of their customers responded. They had 859 promoters in that 9 or 10. They had 98 of their customers were in the passive range, and they had 39 customers that said their response basically gave the impression, oh goodness, they might be at risk of leaving. Those 39 should be called immediately and figure out what the problem is and be able to mitigate it. You can classify this data based on which carrier they're written with, which producer they have, or what thing just happened inside that customer's account. And really important, the data right here might lead you to think that producer number E is the problem. For this agency, I actually know they shared the information. Producer number E actually was an acquisition, and a lot of the business was written with carrier number E. The problem was actually with claims with carrier E, and that's what was causing the low score. They were able to mitigate that and get a different underwriter, different support. Actually, it wasn't. It was the ability to bind agency or bind new business with that carrier was slow. And there was a lot of people super irritated with the process. So my point is this data allows you to possibly cross-train if you've got a problem on one of your staff, but ultimately identify which customers to start with so you can make sure your retention stays high. Talked about virtual assistants a little bit earlier, but when time and capacity is probably one of the biggest challenges, thinking about roles and the parts of a role that can be the parts of the role that are repetitive, that can be utilized or handled differently to create capacity on the rest of your team, can lead to huge profitability and efficiency savings inside an agency. It is a big leap. I would tell you that 50% of people that use VAs have a start and stop problem. People are people. It's just like hiring someone else. So you have to find the right fit. You also can't think that they're going to be trained exactly like you do things in your agency. But for those that go in and actually identify a clean process, that they're going to have someone who is cheaper labor, part of their team, handle that across the entire agency, it is incredibly effective. There are lots of different virtual assistant companies out there. You want to know more? I strongly recommend calling me. I'll connect you with agencies that do it really, really well. I use VAs myself. It is definitely, I started talking about VAs about 5 years ago, and I would go to a room and two people would raise their hands that are utilizing VAs. Now, more than half the room is raising their hands that they're utilizing VAs. It's based on need, and I strongly suggest paying attention to what that looks like and whether or not that makes sense for your agency. We already talked about agencies are utilizing networks as part of the way in order to create some relief in the carrier relationships, hopefully get commission rates that are negotiated, possibly get contingencies that they wouldn't be able to get on their own. Lots of different things to think about there. The only thing I will say here is they're not all created equal. There are a lot of, you need to make sure you understand the agreements that you are signing, because it could create a barrier for exit for you. Also large fees. I'm not advocating or steering you away from it. I'm just saying this is a strategy that a lot of agencies are utilizing. Many agencies that are thinking differently are redefining those benchmarks. They're redefining retention by utilizing the NPS or the centimeter score. Their new business is going up because they've created capacity. Their average policy size is a great way in order to work harder or work smarter, not harder. Again, there's lots of different things, but if you don't have the data, you can't manage that. Remember that EBITDA number is the thing you can control from a financial standpoint. All the risk we just talked about goes into what multiple to apply to your EBITDA to get to your overall value. So make sure you focus on the thing that you can control, not all your focus on what are the going multiples in the industry. It's easy to get distracted by that number. And there's so many other things inside your agency that you could use this information in order to leverage and make your agency as sound as possible for whatever time in the future that you want to acquire another agency or you want to exit. Happy to answer any questions that have come up. If you wanted to speak to, listen, I get it. Sometimes people don't ask questions because it's a sensitive topic. If you wanted to meet with me individually, every single one of you has 30 minutes free to talk about anything you want as our partnership agreement with Louisiana. I'm happy to do that anytime. Happy to answer anything you've got today or any part of this presentation that you want me to dig into further. Right.
Thank you so much, Carey.
You're welcome.
If anyone has a question, y'all can drop it into the chat. While we're doing that, I have a couple of follow-up things. Let me get the QR code up real quick for y'all.
Cool.
So if y'all want to go ahead and scan this QR code, this will get you that CE. A couple things I do want to mention. We have 3 more opportunities for webinars with Carey. She just mentioned something about VAs. The next webinar is next Wednesday, September 11th, and it's about redefining your team, the power of VAs, bots, and automation. So if that struck a nerve with y'all, that is going to be another great webinar. It is pending 1 hour of CE, so we're hoping by next week we have that. As she mentioned at the beginning, slides and recording will be available to everyone after. I can't help but mention as well, you not only have 4 opportunities to hear from Carey right now, but she will be speaking at our Women in Insurance Conference with her daughter, Lindsay, in April. It's April 3rd and 4th, I believe. If you didn't come this year, it's going to be even better next year. So definitely mark your calendars for that. I dropped in the chat a link to Catalyst, which she talked about, a link to AgencyFocus, which is her company, and there's tons of resources on there. If you don't listen to her podcast, you should. It's called Insurance Refocused, again, with her and Lindsay. It's a wonderful podcast and a wonderful resource. So go ahead and scan that QR code if you have any last minute questions. We can get those in. But I think that's it for now, right, Carey?
Yeah, absolutely.